You're listening to Murder Not Murdering with Erin,
And Autumn,
a true crime podcast about murder and murdering.
but we are not murderers.
All right, everybody, we're back at Murder Not Murdering with Erin, and
Autumn.
that's her. That's Autumn, my podcast partner.
And Erin went to a concert this past weekend.
I sure did. I went to a 3-day music festival at the Gorge Amphitheater. If you haven't been, it sits over top of a canyon and it's the most stunning place ever. You literally sit there and look out and it looks fake. It looks like it could not be real, but it is stunning and the sun is setting and it's just beautiful. We went and saw Brandy Carlisle, um, and it was the
At the
first
Gorge in George.
at the Gorge and George, and it was Brandy Carlisle the first night with Indigo Girls, and then the second night was, Brandy Carlisle, Sarah Bareilles, and Bonnie Raitt, and then the third night was the Highwomen, Sheryl Crow, Brittany Spencer, Bonnie Raitt came back out, and Linda Perry came out and sang a song, which was wild, and it's just an incredible time for music and, people coming together, and everyone is so kind, like, people would just walk by and be like, "Hey, I'm going to fill up water bottles, you want me to fill up yours?" And it was just, like, a really nice, kind group of people, and for the first time ever, I tried glamping, and I grew up camping in Washington State, which means it's cold and rainy and awful. So I think I did my time camping. I don't need to do it anymore. However, I will say we glamped at the Oasis and it was wonderful. We had the best time. The place was super nice, super clean. There's personal showers, clean bathrooms, hot showers, like, and they provide breakfast every day. And we ended up having a great time. It was lovely. 10 out of 10 would go again and do that.
Sounds fun.
Autumn, you're a camper, right?
Fuck no.
Yeah, I didn't think so. I don't think you'd
I
even
mean, in
glamp.
my childhood, yes, I would. I've done a lot of camping in my childhood and in my young adulthood, but I'm past that now. I don't want to sleep on the ground.
No, I was saying I don't think you would glamp now.
I'd glamp.
You think you'd glamp at the glamping
Yeah.
place we went
Yeah.
to?
Yeah. I don't think there'd be
You're
a
in
problem
a
with that.
tent. You are in a
Yeah.
tent. But
I know
real
what.
beds.
Yeah, I know it. That place. I've seen it before.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
real
I
beds, real pillows, like the whole thing.
I mean, they have AC, so I mean,
That is a big deal, especially because for those of you that don't know, the gorge is literally in a desert. It's the hottest part of Washington State, pretty much. And it gets hot as hell there. But the craziest thing happened while we were there. The most insane storm I have ever been in my entire life. And I've seen windstorms like no other. This was unreal. There were 75-mile-an-hour winds. We had to get evacuated out of all of our tents and into our cars for safety. There was lightning literally everywhere. It's the closest I ever got to feeling like I was gonna be, like, flown over the rainbow. It was insane. It was already the gayest concert ever. I was like, "If we go flying over the rainbow, I swear to God, you guys." There's I was just sitting there, I was like, "It's a twista." Like, I was expecting a cow to fly by us, like, it was crazy, crazy wind, but what we did to get through this moment was listen to a soundtrack of only songs regarding rain or storms, and then we drank a bottle of champagne, because why the fuck not? If we're gonna die, we might as well go out having fun. So we ended up having a blast, actually, and when we were stuck in the car. And then we ran out thinking we could go make dinner at our area, and then, they were like, "Code red, back to your cars, back to your cars," and we had to go running across the field. It was wild, but we survived. We made it. I did keep singing the Reba McEntire "I'm a Survivor" after it because, like,
of course you did.
we really made it through that. But then it ended up being, like, the most incredible rest of the weekend. So, anyways, that was fun and lovely. Let's talk about some really bad shit.
Yep, let's get into it.
I have kind of a long case, so that's why we're going to cut off chit chat a little early. Anyways, I'm going to be doing a case specifically because this month kicks off Pride. And so I'm just going to jump right into it if you're ready, Autumn.
I'm always ready for true crime.
True crime all the time
All the time,
and rosé all day.
all day.
Okay, here we go. I am doing the murder of Paul Broussard, the crime that changed Houston. And like I said, before we begin into today's case, I want to take a moment to acknowledge something. This episode is being released during Pride Month. And for some people, Pride means celebration, celebrating who you are and who you love. It means rainbow flags, parades, drag performances, community events, chosen family, and most importantly, joy. But Pride did not begin as a celebration. Pride began because people were tired of being afraid, tired of hiding, tired of being arrested for existing, and tired of losing jobs, homes, families, and opportunities. They were also tired of the violence. I want to acknowledge that Pride began as a protest. And every June, while we celebrate how far we've come, we also remember why those protests started in the first place. Today's case is one of those reminders because this murder happened in 1991, not 1891, not 1951, not even 1971, 1991. The year Nirvana was climbing the charts, the year people were renting movies from Blockbuster, the year many of us listening were already alive. And that year, a young man named Paul Broussard walked out of a Houston nightclub with friends after a normal evening, and within hours, he would be dead. And his murder would spark outrage, activism, and a reckoning that transformed an entire city. When most people think of Houston, Texas, they think of oil, NASA, massive freeways, cowboys, and heat. And all of those things are fair. Houston is enormous, and it's always been a city of contradictions, progressive in some ways and deeply conservative in others. A place where wealth and poverty often exist side by side. In the 1980s and early 1990s, Houston was also home to one of the largest LGBTQIA communities in the South. At the center of that community was a neighborhood called Montrose. Montrose wasn't officially designated as a gay district. It simply became one. Because when people are pushed to the margins, they find each other. They create space, communities, and find safety among each other. For many LGBTQIA Houstonians, Montrose felt like home. And for some, it was the first place they'd ever felt safe enough to be themselves. While Montrose represented freedom to so many people, it also represented something very different to others. To some people, it was a target. To understand what happened next, it's important to understand the atmosphere of Montrose at the time. Many LGBTQ residents already knew violence was possible. Stories circulated constantly: harassment, threats, assaults, people yelling slurs from passing cars. Groups targeted gay men leaving clubs. These incidents often didn't receive widespread attention. Many victims didn't even report attacks. Some feared being outed. Others, rightly, believed nothing would happen. And historically, violence against LGBTQ individuals was often minimized, ignored, or they blamed the victims themselves. Imagine calculating whether it was safe enough to hold someone's hand walking down the street. For many people in Montrose, this was daily life. And yet, despite all of that, the community thrived because joy has always existed alongside struggle. People fell in love, made friends, built careers, went dancing. And by 1991, tensions were running high. The AIDS epidemic had devastated communities across the country. Entire friend groups disappeared, partners buried partners, families abandoned their loved ones, and the federal government's response had been criticized for years. But the LGBTQ Americans were already exhausted. So, what happened to Paul Broussard would become the moment many people decided enough was enough. Paul Gilbert Broussard was born in 1964. By all accounts, he was well liked and deeply loved. He attended Texas A&M University. He worked as a banker. Friends described him as intelligent, kind, and social. He enjoyed spending time with friends. He was active in Houston's LGBTQ community, and he was 27 years old. 27.
So
Whenever
young.
I It is. Whenever I say an age like that, I always pause because 27 feels impossibly young. You have plans and goals. You assume you'll have time. On July 3rd, 1991, the 4th of July holiday was approaching. People were going out and celebrating, meeting friends and having drinks. Paul was no different. On the evening of July 3rd, he spent time in Montrose with friends. It wasn't a special night. This wasn't some dramatic event. No obvious warning signs, and maybe that's one of the most heartbreaking aspects of this story. While Paul was enjoying his evening, another group was gathering, roughly 30 miles north of Houston, in a suburban community known as the Woodlands. Today, the Woodlands is often ranked among the best places to live in America. It's known for its master planned neighborhoods and family friendly amenities. But on this night, a group of young men gathered there for a party. Some were teenagers, some were barely adults. There was alcohol and there were drugs. And as the evening continued, the group decided to drive into Houston. 10 young men. 10. A number that would become infamous in this case. The media would later call them the Woodsland 10. At first, the night appeared unremarkable. They drove around, attempted to enter clubs, hung out together. But witnesses and later testimony would paint a disturbing picture. One that suggests that this wasn't merely a group of young men looking for entertainment. It was a group looking for trouble. As the night turned into early morning, Paul was with friends Carrie Anderson and Richard Delaunay. The evening was winding down. The bars were closing. People were heading home, and the streets were quieter. Three friends making their way through the neighborhood. The group of 10 eventually split between two vehicles, and they cruised the area. The mood was excited, aggressive, and performative. Shortly after 2 a.m., Paul Broussard and his friends were walking through Montrose. A vehicle approached. Someone inside asked for directions. The interaction appeared innocent for a few moments. Then several men jumped out of the vehicles, and what happened next unfolded incredibly fast. Witness testimony later described chaos, confusion, people running, people shouting. The attackers surged towards the three men. Almost immediately, Carrie and Richard ran. 10 attackers. Panic. Both of the men managed to escape. And somehow Paul found himself alone. The group focused on him. 10 against 1. Witnesses later described a brutal assault. Paul was punched, kicked, beaten. Some attackers even wore steel-toed boots. The violence was overwhelming. One witness later described the attack as a swarm, and then a knife appeared. Among the attackers was a 19-year-old named John Buse. According to court records and later admissions, Buse carried a knife that night. During the assault, Paul was stabbed. The blade entered his chest. One wound pierced his heart. The attack lasted only moments, but in that time, Paul had suffered abrasions, puncture wounds, a broken rib, bruised testicles, and 2 stab wounds. As he laid on the ground almost unconscious, 2 of his attackers rifled through his pockets and took a comb as a souvenir. When the attackers finally fled, they left Paul behind in a parking lot, bleeding. dying, 27 years old, a human being reduced to a victim in less than a minute. Emergency services responded. Paul was transported to a hospital, but the injuries were catastrophic. And this is the part that makes me really mad. He died several hours later as a result of both internal injuries as well as what an expert medical examiner termed a delay in treatment. In the early days of the AIDS crisis, police and medical personnel were slow to respond to calls from Montrose for fear of AIDS contamination. That means that hours reportedly ticked by before an ambulance arrived to transport Paul to the hospital, which was less than 3 miles away, which should have only taken 8 minutes to arrive, took hours. And sadly, in that time, Paul Broussard was pronounced dead. For his friends and family, the nightmare had just begun. Those early hours of 4th of July would forever divide life into before and after. News spread quickly through Montrose. The LGBT community was tightly connected. People talked, people called one another, rumors circulated, and details emerged. By sunrise, many residents already knew something terrible had happened. By the end of the day, the broader community knew a gay man had been murdered. And perhaps most disturbing of all, many people weren't surprised. They were horrified, angry, and heartbroken, but not surprised. Houston police immediately launched an investigation. Fortunately, this wasn't a case without witnesses. Paul's friends had survived. Other individuals had seen portions of the attack. Descriptions of the vehicles began circulating. Tips started arriving. And unlike many older cases that we've covered on this very show, investigators had something incredibly valuable: a large number of suspects. 10 people create a lot of opportunities for mistakes, for someone to talk, and for evidence. And that's exactly what happened. Within days, detectives began identifying members of the group. One arrest led to another, one interview led to another, and before long, authorities had assembled what would become known nationwide as the Woodslands 10. The public reaction was immediate. They wanted answers. Who were these young men and what motivated them? Had they specifically targeted Paul because he was gay? Or was this simply a random act of violence? The answers would make people furious. As names emerged, the image of the attackers became more complicated than expected. Most were remarkably young, teenagers and young adults. Their names were Jamie Aguirre, aged 15. 15. Javier Aguirre, age 17. Derek Attard, age 16. John Buse, age 17. Paul Chance Dillon, age 22. Rafael Grable Gonzalez, age 18. Gayland Randall, age 16. Leandro Ramirez, age 15. Brian Spake, age 18. And Jeffrey Valentine, age 17. These were essentially kids. Prosecutors
It's
increasingly
so crazy to think about how young they were and
15
committing such a hateful act.
committing murder. Prosecutors increasingly focused on one fact. The group had gone into Montrose knowing exactly what Montrose was. They hadn't stumbled there accidentally. They knew the neighborhood's reputation, and witnesses reported anti-gay slurs throughout the evening. To many observers, the conclusion seemed obvious. Paul Broussard wasn't attacked because of something he did. He was attacked because of who the attackers believed he was. As details emerged, grief quickly transformed into anger. Not just anger about Paul, anger about years of violence, years of indifference, and years of fear. For many LGBTQIA Houstonians, Paul's murder became a symbol of everything they had endured, and people were tired of hearing that things would get better someday. The community began organizing, activists began meeting, plans were made, and very soon Houston would witness one of the largest LGBTQIA demonstrations in its history. thousands would take to the streets, demanding justice, demanding protection, and change. Because Paul Broussard's murder was no longer just a homicide investigation, it had become a movement. It became known as Houston's Stonewall. Now, to be clear, the events are not identical. The Stonewall uprising in New York was a direct confrontation with police. Paul Broussard's murder was a hate crime. But the comparison exists because both moments changed the trajectory of the local LGBTQIA activism. In 1991, public LGBTQ demonstrations still carried risk. You could be photographed, you could be outed, targeted, lose your job, housing, or relationships. Queer Nation Houston organized what became known as the Take Back the Streets March. Organizers expected probably 800 participants. Instead, roughly 2,000 people flooded Montrose. People marched not only for Paul, they marched for themselves. Many participants later described the event as transformative. For some, it was the first protest they had ever attended. For others, it was the first time they were unapologetically visible. This protest was impossible to ignore. Then came the confessions. And honestly, this is one of the more surprising parts of this case. Many of the suspects spoke to the police without attorneys present. One after another, investigators obtained statements. Instead of a complicated mystery, the case became quickly a matter of sorting out individual responsibility. Investigators ultimately identified 17-year-old John Buse as the person who fatally stabbed Paul Broussard. And Buse later admitted to carrying a pocket knife during the attack. Now, no discussion of this case is complete without discussing Ray Hill. Hill was already one of Houston's most recognizable LGBTQ activists. Following Paul's murder, he became one of the loudest voices demanding action. He met with reporters and organized demonstrations, applied pressure to city officials, and he helped ensure that the story stayed in the public eye. As we know, public attention creates accountability, and when the cameras disappear, so often does the urgency.
Huh.
As public demonstrations continued, prosecutors prepared their case. The evidence was substantial: multiple suspects, multiple confessions, witnesses, physical evidence. The challenge wasn't proving that an attack occurred. The challenge was determining how to handle 10 defendants, and many of which were underage. So rather than one massive trial, prosecutors pursued plea agreements with many of those involved. Some community members supported the approach, others didn't. Some wanted lengthy trials, and many wanted guaranteed convictions. The legal system rarely delivers a perfect outcome. But one defendant stood apart from the others, and that's John Buse, the teenager identified as delivering the fatal stab wounds. And his punishment would be the most severe. In 1992, John Buse pleaded guilty to murder. The plea agreement resulted in a 45-year prison sentence. This was the hardest sentence handed down among the Woodlands 10. Other participants received varying punishments. Some received prison terms, others received probation after cooperating with prosecutors. To me personally, I am not satisfied. They
No.
they actively pursued someone from the LGBTQIA community, beat them, stabbed them, and even though not all of them landed that blow that killed Paul, they still left him to die, all of them.
Yeah, they did.
And the question is, had the others not gotten away, would there have been more blood on the streets? Absolutely. By the time the legal proceedings were underway, something remarkable had already happened. Houston had changed, not overnight, but noticeably. The public conversation surrounding anti-LGBTQ violence had shifted. People were paying attention, and activists intended on keeping that pressure on. And more than 35 years later, people are still talking about it. There's a phrase that you hear sometimes after a tragedy. People say, we need to move on. And in some situations, that's completely understandable. But many LGBTQIA Houstonians had no interest in moving on because moving on would mean returning to the status quo. And the status quo was not working. Paul's murder forced conversations that many leaders had previously avoided. And
Mhm.
while symbols can sometimes feel abstract, it's important to remember that behind every symbol is a real person. Paul wasn't trying to become a movement, he wasn't trying to become a historical figure. He was trying to get home.
Mhm.
And that's it. One of the most fascinating and unusual developments after Paul's murder was something called Operation Vice Versa. Now, if you haven't heard of it, you're not alone. I had no clue. In the wake of the murder, Houston police wanted to better understand the violence occurring in Montrose. So officers conducted an undercover operation, some officers posing as gay men. And what happened next shocked many people. Not any of the LGBT people, but it shocked the cops. Because it didn't take long for officers to experience harassment themselves, threats, verbal abuse, attempts at violence. The operation demonstrated something people had been screaming for years. The danger wasn't exaggerated, the violence wasn't isolated, and now authorities had firsthand evidence. For many activists, the operation validated concerns that had long been dismissed. For years, they were told you're overreacting, being overly sensitive, but this problem was real. So, back to the case. We all know that parole hearings can reopen wounds decades after a crime occurs. As John Buse became eligible for parole, public discussion intensified once again. For some people, the answer was simple: he had taken a life, he should remain in prison. Others pointed to his age at the time of the crime, 17 years old. They argued that people can change, that rehabilitation should mean something, right? Decades behind bars should count for something. One of the most remarkable developments involved Ray Hill, that activist I mentioned earlier who helped lead public outrage after Paul's murder.
Mhm.
This is wild to me. Over the years, Ray Hill and John Buse developed a relationship through correspondence, a relationship that surprised many people, including people within Houston's LGBTQIA community. Hill became one of Buse's supporters during
Mhm.
parole proceedings. Now, I want to be clear, this was very controversial. Many people disagreed with Ray Hill. Some were furious. Hill sat in those parole hearings and argued that he believed that John Buse had changed, that continued imprisonment served little purpose, and others strongly disagreed, especially Paul's family. Throughout the parole process, one voice remained consistent: Paul's mother, Nancy Rodriguez. For decades, she attended hearings, spoke publicly, advocated on behalf of her son, and reminded everyone that behind every legal argument was a human being who never got the chance to grow older because someone took those years away. I think it's important to remember when discussing parole, it's easy to focus on the offender, the rehabilitation, but victims don't get parole. Families don't get parole. In 2015, after serving approximately 23 years, John Buse was released. News coverage revisited the murder, activists revisited the protests. A new generation learned about Paul Broussard for the first time. And in a strange way, the release ensured that Paul's story would continue to be remembered. It's 2026. It's been 35 years after the murder, and journalists and activists reflected on Paul's legacy. Many pointed to the substantial progress: legal protections, greater visibility, more public support for LGBTQ rights, more than most people thought in 1991 could have even happened. But they also pointed to ongoing concerns. Violence still occurs, hate crimes still occur, discrimination still exists, and this fight isn't over, especially in the current administration. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to cover this case during Pride Month, because Pride is often presented as a celebration, and it is, don't get me wrong. But it's also remembrance, it's history, it's acknowledging the people that didn't make it, people whose names don't always appear in textbooks, but whose lives mattered. Paul Broussard is one of those people. And when people talk about pride, sometimes you hear the question, why do we still need it? And I think stories like this provide part of that answer. Not because we're trapped in the past, not because nothing has improved, but because history matters, because
Mhm.
communities deserve to tell their stories. And because 35 years ago, a young man was walking home through Houston that never made it there. His name was Paul Broussard. He was 27 years old, and he deserves to be remembered. My sources were Houston Public Media documentary, A Murder in Montrose, The Paul Broussard Legacy, reporting from the Houstonia magazine, the Houston Chronicle, the Houston LGBT History Project Archives, PBS, Outsmart Magazine, KHOU, ABC 13 Houston, The Gailey, and contemporary reporting and court records relating to the murder of Paul Broussard and the prosecution of the Woodslands 10.
That story, is really hard,
It is.
and there's something that I wanted to say about that one. I'm very familiar with this story. I have a very close personal family member who I, adore and who's part of the LGBTQIA community, and he is also HIV positive. And one of the things about this specific case was the delay in care because of the
Exactly.
fear of AIDS and
And
gay people having AIDS. It was a gay disease, is what everyone was believing. They delayed care to Paul Broussard for almost, I think it was, if I can't, I'm trying to remember. It was
it
like
was hours.
it was
Mhm.
a minimum of at least 3 hours before the ambulance even got him and took him. I think it was like a couple miles down the road to the hospital. And then it took them time to find somebody to give him care. I
Exactly.
mean,
It was
uh,
it
the
took them 40.
possibility of him surviving could have, I mean, like, that is insane, the delay of care. When they got there, he was conversating with the police
No,
officers.
he was
He
talking to
was
them and everything.
talking. He didn't
Mhm.
I mean, I'm not gonna say that he could have been saved, I don't know, but 3 hours delay in care and he died of internal injuries, I
He
think there
was
could
w
have been a chance.
So he was waiting for the ambulance. When the ambulance finally arrived, it's an 8-minute drive to the hospital, and it took them 40 additional minutes to get to the hospital. Then they had to find someone that would treat him.
Yep.
And mind you, he was not HIV positive.
No, he wasn't. They were just afraid because he was
They
gay.
were afraid. They were
Mhm.
afraid. And that is something that, again, we can't say for sure if it would have saved his life. His heart was pierced by, the stab wound. So, it's not to say that he could have been saved, but that is absolutely ridiculous because how many other people didn't receive care during that time as well. It's just
It's
mind-blowing,
unacceptable.
unacceptable. And it's just it shows you the level of fear, especially in the '90s, the level of
Mhm.
fear that was out there, and the fear-mongering came a lot from
Mhm.
our government,
Yeah.
you know? It's just horrifying. I vividly remember, uh, seeing Princess Diana
Mhm.
on the cover of magazines because people were couldn't believe that she went to a hospital and visited AIDS
Mhm.
patients.
Mhm.
I mean, they were thinking you were just gonna catch it by being in a proximity of someone else. I mean, that's
Mhm.
just insane, and the things that we've know
Right.
now changes everything. I mean,
Everything.
I know several people that are positive, and they're living healthy, happy lives, and they have a long life ahead of them because
And you
of
can
the
give them
progress.
hugs,
Yes,
and you can touch them.
but because of the progress that was made in the medical field from then till now, and the stigmas, I think, are so far,
So
in the past. But
so far.
all of that goes back to, discrimination, and it's really sad. It's a sad
Mhm.
case, but and it is famous. But for those that don't know this case, I wanted to cover it, especially during
Yeah.
Pride Month,
I feel
especially
like it's
because it
very
was
important.
2015 is not that long ago, and that's
No.
when
Did,
because
he
he was
also
released.
he was released, and he also was rearrested for driving drunk.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I mean, I did see that he tried to do all this weird stuff, like issuing an apology to the LGBT
Yes.
community.
He did that, before.
It is
Yeah.
so fucking weird to me that he and that activist became, like, best
So,
friends,
apparently he was I
and
mean, I've
and Ray Hill is
seen a
not
lot of
liked.
no, no,
He is not
but
liked.
apparently yeah, but I mean, that's neither here nor there, like, but apparently in prison, he was a model prisoner and blah, 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 blah. Okay, great. That doesn't erase the fact that he chose to go to a neighborhood he knew was predominantly gay and target a man innocently walking through a parking lot trying to get home
Well, and beat him and then stabbed him and
and
killed
stabbed him to
him.
death. Like he killed
And
him.
left him there. That's the part that gets me
Yes.
too, is that all the rest of them got, like, 5 years or 2 years, or some didn't get any prison time at all. And the thing is, like, despite what their part was, they all left a man to die, and
Yes.
they would have hurt his friends had they not escaped.
Had they
Like,
not escaped.
so it makes me so angry because I don't think justice was done at all in this
No,
case.
I don't either. And anyone can behave when you're in a
When you're trying to
like
get out of prison,
yes,
when you're
when
trying
you're
to get
trying to get out
paroled,
of prison, trying to get paroled, yes.
don't
And
think that.
look what he did now. He's out there driving drunk and getting arrested with DUIs.
But this is what I'm saying, like, don't believe that this guy didn't have another motive other than trying to get the fuck out of prison.
No, absolutely not. He's a manipulative
And that he brought in and
mm-mm.
that activist, Ray Hill, came in there and he was convinced. He was going to his parole hearings talking on his
Mhm,
behalf. Like, it just blows my fucking mind. Anyways, I think both of us are going to be covering pride cases for the rest
mhm.
of this month. I know you're not
Yeah.
doing one tonight.
Not this tonight, but yeah.
But historically, we have always covered, LGBTQIA history, during this month. So we'll both be covering cases as we go along. So be prepared that that is what this month is going to have, and hopefully next week I'll find a case that none of you have heard before. But that was one that I just felt like I had to cover. There's some that I'll never do that are too famous, and I'll leave those to autumn, I guess.
The famous ones.
I know you do. All right, let's move on to Autumn's case and find out what you have for us this week.
They have. I'm gonna skip right into it.
Might as
The
well.
murder the murder of Moriah Wilson. This is a very famous case.
I was like, I think
Now,
I know this one.
it was the Netflix documentary one that I was gonna do, and then I switched it, and I ended up doing it this week. So here we go. There are some murders that seem impossible to understand, not because investigators don't know who did it, not because the evidence is complicated, but because when you look at the people involved, everything feels so preventable. A missed phone call, a deleted text, a relationship that should have ended months earlier, a moment of jealousy that should have passed, one decision that never should have been made. And yet, somehow, all of those small choices collided on a warm spring evening in Austin, Texas, leaving one young woman dead on a friend's apartment floor, a rising star in professional cycling, a daughter, a sister, a friend. just 25 years old. And then, almost as shocking as the murder itself, came the story of the woman accused of pulling the trigger, a yoga instructor who disappeared, a woman who allegedly fled the country using someone else's passport, someone who changed her appearance, assumed new identities, and hid for weeks in Costa Rica while authorities searched for her across continents. It's a story that sounds like fiction, but at its center is a very real victim, a woman named Anna Moriah Wilson. Most people knew her simply as Mo, and this story is her story. Anna Moriah Wilson was born on May 18th, 1996, in New Hampshire. She grew up in the small town of Kirby, Vermont, alongside her brother Matthew. By all accounts, she came from a close knit and deeply supportive family. Athletics were simply part of life. Competition wasn't something that had to be forced on her. She embraced it naturally. As a child, Mo became an accomplished skier and eventually rose through the ranks as a nationally ranked junior athlete. She attended Burke Mountain Academy, a school known for developing elite athletes. The future looked bright. But over time, another sport began capturing her attention: cycling. What started as an interest quickly became a passion, and then it became something much bigger. Friends described Mo as adventurous, driven, and intensely focused, the kind of person who wasn't interested in doing things halfway. If she committed to something, she gave it everything she had. She graduated from Dartmouth College in 2019 with an engineering degree. Even after college, she balanced a professional career while continuing to pursue cycling at a high level. She worked as a demand planner for Specialized, one of the most recognized names in the cycling world. But eventually, her talent became impossible to ignore, and the races got bigger. The wins started piling up, and Mo made the leap into professional cycling full time. By 2022, she was considered one of the sport's brightest rising stars. She was young, she was successful, she was doing exactly what she loved. And from the outside, it looked like her life was just beginning. About 900 miles away from Mo's Vermont roots, another story had been unfolding, one that would eventually intersect with hers in devastating fashion. Caitlin Armstrong grew up in Livonia, Michigan. She was older than Mo by nearly a decade. Friends and acquaintances described her as athletic, independent, and active in Austin, Texas's cycling community. She taught yoga, she worked as a realtor, and she had been involved in an on again, off again relationship with professional cyclist Colin Strickland. The relationship had lasted for years, but according to court testimony and investigators, it wasn't always stable. There were breakups, reconciliations, periods of separation, periods of uncertainty. One of those separations occurred in late 2021. And during that break, Colin met Moriah Wilson. The two connected through cycling. Eventually, they began a brief romantic relationship. It wasn't a secret to them, but it would become a secret to someone else. Because before long, Colin and Caitlin reconciled. Their relationship resumed. And, according to investigators, Colin attempted to keep his previous involvement with Mo hidden. He later admitted to police that he concealed communications, deleted messages, used pseudonyms in his phone, and tried to prevent Caitlin from discovering the extent of his contact with Mo. It was a decision that would become critically important later because prosecutors would ultimately argue that Caitlin Armstrong knew enough to be deeply angry and increasingly jealous. By May of 2022, Mo was traveling to Texas for an upcoming gravel cycling race. The race was scheduled in Hyco, Texas. She arrived in Austin beforehand and stayed with a friend. The trip should have been routine. Another race, another opportunity, another step forward in a rapidly growing career. Instead, it would become the final days of her life. On May 11th, 2022, Mo spent part of the day with Colin Strickland. The two met for a swim at Austin's Deep Eddy Pool. Later, they had dinner together. According to investigators, the outing was friendly. There was no indication that Mo believed she was in danger. No indication that anything unusual was about to happen. That evening, Colin dropped her off at the residence where she was staying. The home belonged to a friend. He drove away, and Mo went inside. She never came back out. Shortly before 10 p.m., her friend discovered her body. The scene was horrifying. Moriah Wilson had been shot multiple times. An autopsy later determined she suffered 3 gunshot wounds, 2 to the head, 1 to the chest. Investigators would later state that some of the wounds were inflicted after she was already on the floor. There were no signs of a robbery, no evidence suggesting a random attack. Whoever had done this appeared to have come for one reason, and one reason alone: to kill her. Police immediately began trying to reconstruct Mo's final hours. One of the first people they spoke with was Colin Strickland. After all, he was one of the last people known to have seen her alive. Investigators scrutinized his movements, examined his statements, looked for inconsistencies, but eventually they ruled him out as a suspect. The focus shifted elsewhere, and surveillance footage would prove critical. Video captured a black Jeep Grand Cherokee arriving near the residence shortly before the murder. Investigators traced the vehicle. It belonged to Caitlin Armstrong. Suddenly, the case took a dramatic turn. Police dug deeper. What they uncovered painted a picture of a mounting jealousy. According to investigators, Caitlin had learned about Colin's involvement with Mo. An anonymous tipster later claimed Caitlin had expressed a desire to kill Moriah. The tipster also stated Caitlin had either recently purchased a firearm or planned to. Investigators learned that Colin had purchased handguns for both himself and Caitlin. One weapon in particular caught their attention: a Sig Sauer P365 registered to Caitlin Armstrong. When forensic testing was completed, authorities found what they described as a significant ballistic match between a casing from that weapon and shell casings recovered at the murder scene. The evidence was becoming difficult to ignore. Police brought Caitlin in for questioning. And what happened next would become one of the strangest twists in the entire case. During questioning, investigators confronted her with evidence. According to police reports, when asked about Mo and Colin's relationship, Caitlin became visibly angry. But she made no meaningful statement. So she was arrested. Yet within hours, she walked free. Not because police believed she was innocent, not because the evidence had fallen apart, but because of a bureaucratic error, a discrepancy involving her birth date on a warrant, a technicality,
So
one that
annoying.
allowed, yes, one that allowed the prime suspect in a murder investigation to leave custody. And by the time authorities corrected the mistake, she was gone. On May 17th, a warrant was issued for Caitlin Armstrong's arrest on a murder charge. But investigators couldn't find her because she had already fled. Authorities would later learn she traveled to Costa Rica using her sister's passport. Once there, she began creating an entirely new identity.
I have to say, whenever I travel, I look at my passport. I know it's me. I'm still panicky. I don't know how she traveled with her sister's passport and didn't get caught.
Yeah, I've seen the pictures of
They're
her
not
sis
twins.
they're not twins. So I'm like, it's interesting how they were just like, okay, here you
Yep.
go.
Sounds good. Bye. Have a good trip. What the fuck?
Right. I mean, shit. Yeah. So once there, she began creating an entirely new identity, actually, multiple identities.
There you go.
According According to investigators, Caitlin changed her appearance dramatically. She dyed her hair, cut it short, and underwent cosmetic procedures. She got a nose job.
Yeah, it's like face off.
hmm At one point, she reportedly claimed injuries to her face came from a surfing accident. But authorities
Sure.
suspected something else, an effort to avoid recognition, an effort to disappear. For 43 days, she remained a fugitive. Meanwhile, the case drew national attention. People were stunned. A rising professional athlete had been murdered. The suspect had vanished, and an international manhunt was underway. Then investigators got creative. The U.S. Marshal Service learned Caitlin Armstrong was attempting to find work as a yoga instructor. So they devised an unusual strategy. They created a Facebook advertisement seeking yoga teachers. Eventually, the effort paid off. On June 29th, 2022, Caitlin was located at a hostel in Santa Teresa, Costa Rica. She was arrested. The search was finally over, but the legal battle was only beginning. Back in Texas, Caitlin pleaded not guilty. The case moved slowly through the court system. There were delays, legal challenges, arguments over evidence. Then, in October 2023, something happened that seemed almost unbelievable. Again, while being escorted to a medical appointment outside jail, Caitlin escaped from officers. For a brief period, she was on the run once more. The escape didn't last long. She was captured after a short chase. But for many observers, it reinforced the same question they'd been asking since 2022. If she was innocent, why keep running
For real. Or change your appearance, you
or
fucking
change your
psychopath.
appearance? And you should see the video footage of this because they have it of her running away. It's kind of comical. She's like in shackles and she's running and they're chasing her. It's like, what the fuck? Where do you think you're
Where what do you think
going?
yeah, what's the outcome here? You think you're
Right,
gonna get
girl,
away?
you're not going
No.
to get away. The murder trial finally began on October 30th, 2023. Prosecutors laid out their case. The surveillance footage, the ballistic evidence, the relationship history, the jealousy, the flight to Costa Rica, the altered appearance, the aliases. Piece by piece, they argued that Caitlin Armstrong had tracked down Moriah Wilson and murdered her because of her relationship with Colin Strickland. The defense challenged the evidence and maintained her innocence. But after hearing weeks of testimony, jurors reached their conclusion. On November 16th, 2023, Caitlin Armstrong was found guilty of murder. She was sentenced to 90 years in prison. She would not become eligible for parole until she had served 30 years. At 36 years old, much of her life would now be spent behind bars. But while headlines focus on the trial, the Wilson family faced a very different reality. No sentence could bring Mo back. No conviction could restore the future she was supposed to have. The races she never got to ride, the adventures she never got to take, the decades she never got to live. In 2024, her parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit. Eventually, a judge ordered Caitlin Armstrong to pay $15 million to the Wilson family. Yet, even that victory came with complications. Investigators later alleged Caitlin had attempted to move assets to family members and Colin Strickland before the judgment could be enforced.
That doesn't surprise me.
Me either.
Just fucking A.
Additional lawsuits followed. But beneath all of the legal filings was a simple truth. The Wilson family wasn't fighting for money. They were fighting for accountability and for the preservation of their daughter's legacy. Today, that legacy continues through the Moriah Wilson Foundation. The reminder that while one person's actions ended a life, they did not erase its impact. People still remember Mo, not because of how she died, but because of how she lived. Her talent, her determination, her kindness, the joy she found in competition, the way she seemed to embrace life at full speed, just as she embraced cycling. When cases like this make headlines, it's easy for the story to become consumed by the drama. The love triangle, the international manhunt, the disguises, the escape attempts, the courtroom battles. Those details are shocking, and they make for compelling news coverage. But sometimes, all of that noise can drown out the most important person in the story, Moriah Wilson, a 25-year-old woman who should have been packing for her next race, calling her parents, planning the future, living the life she worked so hard to build. Instead, her name became attached to a murder case that captivated the world. And maybe that's what makes this story so heartbreaking. Not that investigators struggled to find a suspect, not that justice was never served, but that none of it had to happen. Because at the center of this case wasn't some grand criminal conspiracy, it was jealousy, the kind of emotion every human being experiences. But when jealousy becomes obsession and obsession becomes action, the consequences can be irreversible. One moment of rage can destroy countless lives. A promising athlete lost her future. A family lost a daughter. Friends lost someone they loved. And another woman threw away her own life in the process, leaving behind a tragedy that never should have happened at all. And for the people who loved Mo, that's the hardest truth of all. Not wondering who did it, not wondering why, but wondering what her life might have become if she had simply been allowed to keep living it. My sources were Wikipedia, Netflix, Fox News, Fox 7 Austin, CNN, ABC News, and NBC News.
Look at us in our Texas cases.
I know.
Who would have
It's
thought?
bigger in Texas, y'all.
I mean, I think the thing that is that case is one of those ones that, makes reporters salivate, right? It has
Mhm.
all of the pieces to it that you think that you want. The thing that I find so upsetting, especially when you have someone like Mariah, she's someone who you see living life to the fullest, really out there as an athlete, every day, grueling, all of the things she was doing between skiing and biking and
And
all of it.
loving it and just being so involved in the community and being
And
so
being
full
so
of life.
alive, and
Yes.
so,
Mhm.
not that other people that pass away are not alive, obviously they are,
No, of course
but
not.
there's something about someone that takes takes the world
Life
by
by the
storm,
horns, yeah, and just, like,
that
lives with
makes
their
you go,
passion.
it makes you so sad. And this one fucking woman just, I mean, it's just so sad. It's so
So
sad.
sad.
And the audacity of that fucking woman, I just
Mhm,
can't. It's
mhm.
just too much. It's too much. Well, I hope she enjoys her nose job in prison.
Me too, me too.
Anyways, all right, everybody. Those are our cases for this week. We will be back next week on Monday. New episodes always come out on Mondays, as long as I get them edited in time. Ha ha.
She does a lot of
Uh,
work.
I do a lot of work. So that's when new episodes come out. Do visit our subreddit, Murder Not Murdering. That is also where it's easy to reach us, as well as DMs on Instagram if you have cases you'd like us to cover, or maybe you wanted to tell us something that you wanted to hear, or maybe you want to tell us we suck. Whatever you want to do, let us know. We love
Mhm.
some feedback, preferably positive.
Preferably positive, that is correct.
We're also on TikTok at mnm.pod, so check that out. Yeah, I think that's all the things, right?
I think that is, and happy Pride Month.
And happy Pride Month. So we will see you next week with two brand new cases. And like I said, we are going to be covering LGBTQIA plus cases this month. So do look out for those. And we are going to see you next week. Bye.
Bye.